Hi everyone, welcome back to a new Roblox story. This time, the story is about the popular Roblox game 99 Nights in the Forest. It's one of my own stories I made, which is for entertaining. Before we start the story, shout out to Lily and Gubby. Thanks to you all for watching our podcast. Jake Martinez had always loved video games, but nothing had ever captured his attention quite like 99 Nights in the Forest. There was something about the game that felt different from other survival horror experiences. More real, more intense, more emotionally engaging. When his friend Alex recommended it during their Discord call 3 weeks ago, Jake had no idea he was about to embark on the most terrifying and heartwarming adventure of his gaming life. "Dude, you have to try this game," Alex had said, his voice crackling through Jake's headphones. "It's called 99 Nights in the Forest. It's this crazy survival horror game where you have to rescue 4 missing kids while this monster deer thing hunts you every night." Jake had downloaded the game that same evening, creating his character and spawning into what looked like an ordinary forest clearing. A small campfire flickered in the center, surrounded by a few basic wooden structures and a sign that read, "Welcome to 99 Nights in the Forest. Can you survive until day 99? Those first few days had been a learning curve. Jake quickly discovered that the campfire was his lifeline. As long as it burned brightly, he was safe from the creatures that emerged after dark. But maintaining the fire required constant attention. He needed to gather wood during the day, store it carefully to keep it dry, and feed the flames regularly to prevent them from dying out. The day and night cycle was unlike anything Jake had experienced in other games. Each day lasted exactly 3 minutes of relative safety, followed by 90 seconds of pure terror when darkness fell. During those nighttime periods, Jake learned to stay close to his campfire and listen carefully for the sounds that meant danger was approaching. The first time he heard the footsteps, Jake's heart had nearly stopped. Heavy, deliberate steps echoing through the forest, getting closer and closer to his small circle of light. When the creature finally emerged from the shadows, Jake understood why the game had such a reputation for being genuinely frightening. The deer monster was unlike anything he had ever seen in a video game. Standing nearly 8 feet tall on its hind legs, it had the basic shape of a deer, but everything was wrong. Its head was too large, its eyes were cartoonishly big, and seemed to glow with their own inner light. And its front legs had evolved into something more like arms with massive clawed hands. Most unsettling of all was how it moved. Not like an animal, but like something trying to remember how to be human. That first night, the deer had simply stood at the edge of Jake's campfire light, watching him with those enormous eyes. When Jake had tried to shine his flashlight at the creature, it had let out an otherworldly shriek and disappeared back into the darkness. But Jake could still hear it out there, pacing around his camp, waiting. As the days passed, Jake began to understand the rhythm of survival in the forest. During daylight hours, he would venture out to gather resources: wood for his fire, berries and mushrooms for food, scrap metal, and other materials for crafting. He learned to recognize the signs of approaching weather, because rain could be deadly if it extinguished his campfire during the night hours. On day 5, Jake had his first encounter with the game's other major threat: the cultists. A group of robed figures wearing deer skull masks had attacked his camp just after sunset, trying to destroy his campfire and drag him into the darkness. Jake had fought them off with a makeshift spear and a revolver he had found in an abandoned cabin. But the experience had shaken him deeply. These weren't just programmed enemies. They moved with intelligence and seemed to be working together with frightening coordination. It was on day 12 that Jake first discovered the missing children board near his campfire. 4 faded posters showed the faces of young children who had disappeared in the forest. Dino Kid, a boy of about 7 wearing a red dinosaur hat. Kraken Kid, a girl with bright blue tentacle-themed clothing. Squid Kid, another boy in yellow with a squid design on his shirt. And Koala Kid, the smallest child, wearing grey clothes with a koala pattern. Below the posters was a handwritten note that made Jake's blood run cold. The deer monster has taken them. It keeps them locked in caves scattered throughout the forest. Only the bravest souls can rescue them, but beware. The caves are heavily guarded, and the deer monster will do anything to keep its prisoners. But there was something else written on the back of the note, in different handwriting. The deer monster is afraid of bright lights. Flashlights can make it retreat, but only temporarily. Fire is your only true protection. Jake had stared at those 4 young faces on the posters and felt something shift inside him. This wasn't just about surviving 99 days anymore. Those children needed help, and Jake was possibly the only one who could provide it. The first rescue attempt came on day 18, when Jake had finally gathered enough courage and supplies to venture deeper into the forest. Following a red arrow that appeared on his map when he clicked on Dino Kid's poster, Jake had made his way to a hillside cave guarded by 5 wolves with glowing red collars. The battle had been intense. Jake's heart pounded as he fought the supernatural wolves with his upgraded spear and a tactical shotgun he had crafted from scavenged parts. Each wolf was faster and stronger than normal animals, and their red eyes seemed to burn with malevolent intelligence. But Jake had persevered, using his knowledge of the game's combat mechanics to defeat the pack. When the last wolf fell, Jake had found a red key among the remains. The cave door, which had been sealed with an ornate red lock, clicked open when he inserted the key. Jake's flashlight beam had revealed a narrow tunnel leading down into the earth, the walls covered with strange symbols that seemed to move in the dancing light. At the end of the tunnel, Jake had found a small room decorated like a child's bedroom, but everything was wrong. The walls were covered with crayon drawings, but instead of typical kid art, every single picture showed the same terrifying figure, the deer monster. The drawings were surprisingly detailed and skillful, showing the creature from different angles and in various poses. Most disturbing of all, some of the drawings showed the deer monster reaching out with its clawed hands, as if trying to touch whoever was looking at the picture. In the corner of the room, sitting on a small bed, was Dino Kid. The boy looked exactly like his missing poster, but his eyes held a sadness that no child should ever have to experience. When he saw Jake, he didn't smile or show relief. Instead, he simply said, "You came for me. But do you know what you're really doing?" "I'm here to rescue you," Jake had replied, but something in the child's tone made him uneasy. "Rescue me from what?" Dino Kid asked, standing up slowly. "From my mama who's been protecting me, from the only place in this forest where the bad men can't reach me." Before Jake could ask what the boy meant, Dino Kid had walked over to him and taken his hand. "I'll come with you because that's what the game wants. But you should know the truth about what's really happening here." Phew. The journey back to Jake's campfire had been nerve-wracking. Every shadow seemed to hide potential threats, and Jake kept his flashlight ready in case the deer monster appeared. But the creature stayed hidden, though Jake could occasionally hear the sound of heavy footsteps following them at a distance. Back at his base, Dino Kid had sat by the campfire and begun drawing more pictures with crayons that seemed to appear from nowhere. Jake watched in fascination and growing unease as the boy created incredibly detailed artwork, showing the deer monster in various scenes. But these weren't the drawings of a traumatized child. They were portraits filled with love and longing. "She watches over us," Dino Kid had explained quietly as he worked. "Even when we can't see her, even when people think she's the monster, she's always there, making sure we're safe." Who? Jake had asked, though he was beginning to suspect he knew the answer. "Mama," Dino Kid replied simply. "She got hurt when the plane crashed, and the bad men did things to her. They changed her, made her big and strong and scary looking. But inside, she's still our mama, and she loves us more than anything in the world." Jake had stared at the boy in shock. According to the game's backstory, The 4 children had been on a plane that crashed in the forest with their mother. But all the rescue reports mentioned only the children. The mother was never found, and everyone assumed she had died in the crash. But if Dino Kid was telling the truth, then the deer monster wasn't some supernatural forest creature. It was Sarah Mitchell, the children's mother, transformed by something the cultists had done to her. This revelation had changed everything about how Jake understood the game. Over the following days, as he prepared for his next rescue mission, he found himself paying closer attention to the deer monster's behavior. The creature still appeared every night at the edge of his campfire light, but now Jake noticed things he had missed before. The way it moved wasn't random or purely predatory. It seemed to be patrolling, watching for threats. Sometimes Jake would catch it, looking not at him, but at Dino Kid sleeping peacefully by the fire. And in those moments, the creature's enormous eyes seemed filled with a love so deep and desperate that it took Jake's breath away. The second rescue mission, on day 32, had taken Jake to a playground hidden deep in the forest, where Kraken Kid was being held by 4 alpha wolves with blue collars. These creatures were even more dangerous than the red-collared wolves, with increased speed and strength that pushed Jake's combat skills to their limit. The battle had lasted nearly an hour of real time as Jake used every trick he had learned about the game's mechanics. He had lured the wolves into bear traps he had crafted and set up around the playground, used the jungle gym equipment as cover while picking off the pack with his bow and arrows, and finally finished the last alpha wolf with a perfectly timed spear thrust. Kraken Kid's cave had been similar to her brother's, but decorated in blue and filled with oceanic imagery. The crayon drawings on the walls showed the deer monster surrounded by water and tentacles, creating surreal underwater scenes that somehow made the creature look peaceful rather than threatening. Kraken Kid herself had been more talkative than her brother, chattering excitedly as Jake led her back to his campfire. "I knew someone would come for us eventually," she had said, skipping along the forest path. "Mama said that good people would find us when it was safe." "Your mama told you that?" Jake had asked. "She visits us sometimes," Kraken Kid explained matter-of-factly. "Not in her new body, because that might scare us, but her voice comes through the cave walls, singing us lullabies and telling us stories about the world outside the forest." Back at Jake's camp, the 2 rescued children had quickly established a routine. They helped with simple tasks like gathering berries and sorting supplies, but mostly they drew pictures and played quiet games by the firelight. Jake noticed that they never seemed afraid during the nighttime hours when the deer monster appeared. Instead, they would wave at the creature as if greeting an old friend. "Hi, Mama," Dino Kid would whisper into the darkness. "We're okay. Jake is taking good care of us." And incredibly, the deer monster seemed to respond. It would nod its massive head and make a sound that was almost like purring, a deep, rumbling noise that somehow conveyed love and approval. The third rescue mission, on day 45, had been the most challenging yet. Squid Kid was being held in a cave guarded by 2 enormous bears, creatures that could kill Jake in just a few hits if he wasn't careful. Jake had spent days preparing, crafting armor and powerful weapons, studying the bears' movement patterns, and planning his approach. The fight had been epic, with Jake using every environmental advantage he could find. He had led the bears through a maze of strategically placed spikes and explosive traps, used his grappling hook to stay mobile while attacking from range, and finally brought down the massive creatures with a combination of poison arrows and well-timed melee strikes. Squid Kid's cave had been the most disturbing so far. The walls were covered with words written in what looked like blood, spelling out warnings like "run" and "they're coming" and "trust no one." But mixed in with these ominous messages were crayon drawings showing the deer monster in protective poses, standing guard over smaller figures that clearly represented the children. Squid Kid himself had been more traumatized than his siblings, speaking in whispers and jumping at unexpected sounds. But as they walked back to Jake's camp, He had opened up about what he had experienced. "I saw the bad men in my cave," he had told Jake quietly. "They wore the skull masks and carried sharp knives. They wanted to hurt me, but Mama wouldn't let them. She fought them off, but they hurt her too." That's when I wrote those warnings on the walls, to tell other people about the danger. "But your mama protected you?" Jake had asked. "Always," Squid Kid replied firmly. "Even when she looks scary now, even when people think she's a monster, she never stops protecting us. She took us to the caves because that was the only way to keep us safe from the bad men." With 3 children rescued, Jake's campfire area had become a small community. The kids helped each other with daily tasks and seemed to find comfort in being together again. They would often sit in a circle, sharing memories of their life before the plane crash and talking about their mother in her human form. "She used to make the best pancakes," Kraken Kid would say dreamily. "And she knew all the best bedtime stories," Dino Kid would add. "She taught me how to draw," Squid Kid would whisper, holding up one of his many pictures of the deer monster. Jake found these conversations both heartwarming and heartbreaking. These children had endured incredible trauma, losing their normal lives in a plane crash, watching their mother transform into something unrecognizable, being separated from each other and hidden in underground caves. But their love for their mother had never wavered, and they understood that everything she had done was to protect them. As the days passed, Jake began to see the deer monster differently as well. The creature no longer seemed like a mindless predator stalking him through the forest. Instead, it was a guardian, watching over its rescued children and ensuring their safety. Sometimes Jake would catch it looking at him with what seemed like gratitude, as if it appreciated his efforts to reunite the family. But there was still one more rescue to complete, and it would prove to be the most difficult challenge Jake had faced in the game. Koala Kid was being held in the deepest part of the forest, in a cave guarded by 6 powerful bears. Unlike the previous rescue missions, this one would require Jake to travel far from his established campfire, venturing into areas of the forest where the very air seemed thick with malevolent energy. Jake spent several days preparing for the mission, crafting the best possible equipment and stockpiling supplies. He built a secondary campfire as close to Koala Kid's cave as possible, creating a staging area for his rescue attempt. The 3 children he had already saved helped with the preparations, their excitement growing as they realized they would soon be reunited with their youngest sibling. "Emma is the quiet one," Dino Kid explained as they worked. "She doesn't talk much, but she's really smart, and she has the most amazing drawings, even better than mine. She's been alone the longest," Kraken Kid added sadly. "I hope she remembers us." "Of course she'll remember us," Squid Kid said firmly. "We're family. Family never forgets." The journey to Koala Kid's cave took Jake through parts of the forest he had never seen before. Ancient trees towered overhead, their branches so thick that barely any sunlight reached the ground. Strange flowers glowed with bioluminescent light, and Jake occasionally spotted creatures moving in the shadows, things that looked almost human, but moved in ways that hurt to watch. This was clearly the oldest part of the forest, where the game's supernatural elements were strongest. Jake could feel the weight of countless years pressing down on him, as if the very ground beneath his feet held memories of terrible events. When Jake finally reached Koala Kid's cave, he understood why this rescue had been saved for last. The 6 guardian bears were unlike any enemies he had faced before. Massive creatures that seemed to be made partly of shadow, with eyes that glowed like burning coals. They moved with intelligence and coordination, working together to surround Jake and cut off his escape routes. The battle lasted for over an hour and required Jake to use every advanced technique he had learned during his time in the forest. He had to constantly move between cover points, using the terrain to his advantage while picking off the bears one by one. His weapons began to break from overuse, forcing him to switch between different tools and improvised weapons as the fight continued. When the last shadow bear finally fell, Jake was exhausted and nearly out of health. But he had succeeded, and the purple key that would open Koala Kid's cave lay at his feet. The cave itself was different from the others, smaller, quieter, and filled with an atmosphere of profound sadness. The walls were covered with drawings, but these were more sophisticated than the artwork in the other caves. They showed detailed scenes of the plane crash, the transformation of their mother, and the separation of the family. But they also showed hope, pictures of the children being reunited, of their mother returning to human form, of the whole family leaving the forest together. Koala Kid herself was sitting in the corner of the cave, working on what appeared to be her latest drawing. She was smaller than Jake had expected, probably only 5 or 6 years old, with large, serious eyes that seemed to hold wisdom far beyond her years. When she saw Jake, she didn't run to him or show excitement. Instead, she simply said, "You're the one Mama told me about, the one who would bring us all together again." "Your Mama told you I was coming?" Jake asked, kneeling down to the little girl's level. Koala Kid nodded solemnly. "She visits me in my dreams. She said that when the time was right, someone good would come to take us back to her, someone who would understand that love doesn't change, even when everything else does." Jake helped Koala Kid gather her drawings and personal belongings, then led her out of the cave and through the dark forest toward his campfire. The journey back was strangely peaceful. No enemies attacked them, and Jake had the distinct feeling that they were being protected by an unseen guardian. When they finally arrived at Jake's campfire, the reunion between the 4 children was one of the most beautiful things Jake had ever witnessed in a video game. They hugged each other tightly, all talking at once as they shared their experiences and expressed their joy at being together again. For the first time since Jake had started playing, the children seemed truly happy and complete. That night, as the 4 rescued children settled down to sleep around the campfire, Jake noticed that the deer monster's behavior had changed again. Instead of staying at the edge of the firelight, the creature moved closer, close enough that Jake could see the details of its transformed features clearly. And for the first time since he had started playing the game, Jake heard the deer monster speak. It was day 67 of his playthrough, and Jake had been so focused on the joy of reuniting the children that he almost missed it. A soft whisper carried on the night wind, so quiet he thought it might be his imagination. "My babies. Where are my babies?" The voice was unmistakably feminine, filled with a mother's desperate love and unimaginable pain. Jake's blood went cold as he realized what he was hearing. The deer monster wasn't just some supernatural creature created by the game's developers. It was Sarah Mitchell, the children's mother, somehow aware and conscious inside her transformed body. Jake's hands shook as he gripped his flashlight. "Who are you?" he whispered into the darkness. Even though he already suspected the answer, the deer monster stepped closer, its massive frame towering over the campfire, but moving with careful gentleness to avoid frightening the sleeping children. When it spoke again, its voice was like rustling leaves mixed with human tears. "I was Sarah Mitchell. I was their mother." Jake's heart pounded as the full truth of the situation became clear. This wasn't just a game about rescuing children from a monster. This was a story about a family torn apart by tragedy and transformed by forces beyond their control. "What happened to you?" Jake asked, his voice barely audible. The deer monster's enormous eyes closed for a moment, and when they opened again, they were filled with ancient pain and infinite love. "The cultists, they found me first. After the crash, I was hurt, bleeding, barely conscious. They said they could help me find my children. They said I needed to be stronger, faster, more capable of protecting them from the dangers of the forest. Jake watched in horror and fascination as the deer monster's form seemed to flicker slightly, and for just a moment, he could see the outline of a human woman inside the creature's massive shape. A mother reaching desperately toward her children with arms that had been transformed into something else entirely. The transformation took days, Sarah continued, her voice growing stronger as she found the words to explain her ordeal. I could feel myself changing, growing, becoming something that wasn't quite human anymore. But through all the pain and terror, I held on to one thought. I had to find my babies. I had to protect them from whatever had caused our plane to crash in this cursed place. But you kidnapped them, Jake said, confused by the contradiction between what he had been told about the game's story and what he was hearing now. You locked them in caves. The deer monster's massive head shook sadly, and Jake could hear the sorrow in her voice when she replied. The cultists, they worship what I became. They see my transformation as some kind of religious miracle, and they want to sacrifice my children to me as offerings. I couldn't let that happen. I took them first, before the cultists could reach them. I hid them in the caves where I knew they would be safe from the cult's knives and rituals. Jake looked at the 4 sleeping children around his campfire, understanding dawning on him like sunrise. They all seemed peaceful and unafraid, even with the deer monster standing so close. And now he knew why. They recognized their mother, even in her transformed state. Mama. The soft voice came from Dino Kid, who had awakened and was now sitting up, looking directly at the deer monster without any fear. Tears were streaming down the young boy's face, but he was smiling. The deer monster let out a sound that was half roar, half sob, the cry of a mother who had been separated from her child for too long. Tommy, my little dinosaur boy. Dino Kid stood up slowly and walked toward the massive creature, his small hand reaching out to touch one of her clawed fingers. We knew it was you, Mama. In the caves, we could smell your perfume sometimes, the same perfume you wore before the crash. And we could hear you singing to us through the cave walls on the nights when we were scared. Jake remembered the crayon drawings scattered throughout each cave, and suddenly they made perfect sense. They weren't drawings of a monster that had traumatized the children. They were portraits of their mother, created by children who loved her so much that they saw beauty even in her transformed state. I couldn't let you see me like this, Sarah said, her monstrous voice breaking with emotion. I'm so big now, so scary looking. I didn't want you to be afraid of what I had become. Kraken Kid had awakened as well, and was now standing beside her brother. We were never afraid of you, Mama. We were afraid that you had forgotten us, that the transformation had taken away your memories of being our mother. Forget you. The deer monster knelt down carefully, bringing her massive head close to the children, while being careful not to accidentally hurt them with her size. I could never forget my babies. Every night, I watch over you. Every day, I fight the cultists who want to hurt you. Everything I've done has been to keep you safe until we could find a way to escape this forest together. Squid Kid had awakened during the conversation and now joined his siblings. Despite being the most traumatized of the children, he ran toward the deer monster without hesitation. I saw you in my cave, Mama. You wrote those warnings on the wall to tell me about the bad men, and when they came with their knives and masks, you fought them off even though they hurt you. Even little Koala Kid had stirred from her sleep, and she approached the family group with her characteristic quiet dignity. I've been drawing pictures of you, Mama. Pictures of how I remember you before the change, and pictures of how you look now, because both versions are beautiful to me. Jake watched this family reunion with tears in his eyes, realizing that he had completely misunderstood the game's central conflict. The deer monster wasn't the villain of this story. She was a mother protecting her children the only way she could, using her transformed body to keep them safe in a forest filled with cultists, dangerous animals, and supernatural threats. There was supposed to be one more, Jake said softly, remembering the game's original setup. I was supposed to rescue Koala Kid from her cave. Sarah's eyes blazed with determination and gratitude as she looked at Jake. Emma. My little Emma. The bears that guard her cave are the most dangerous creatures in the forest. They attack me whenever I try to get close to her, because they've been corrupted by the same dark forces that transformed me. But you have something I don't have. What's that? Jake asked. The ability to move freely through the forest without triggering the supernatural defenses, Sarah explained. The game recognizes you as a player, a hero on a rescue mission. The corrupted creatures see you as a worthy opponent, someone they can fight fairly, but they see me as an abomination to be destroyed on sight. Jake stood up, gripping his weapons with new determination. Then we work together. You keep the bears distracted with your size and strength, and I'll slip into the cave and get Emma out. The mission to rescue Koala Kid became the most intense and emotional sequence Jake had ever experienced in a video game. Working alongside the deer monster, Sarah Mitchell, was like having the most powerful ally imaginable. Her massive claws could tear through the Shadow Bear's defenses, and her presence drew their attention away from Jake's more vulnerable human form. But what made the experience truly special was seeing Sarah fight not as a mindless monster, but as a mother desperate to reach her youngest child. Every move she made was calculated to protect Jake and clear his path to the cave. When one of the bears managed to wound her, Jake could hear her cry out, not in rage or pain, but in frustration at being kept from her daughter. The battle lasted for nearly 2 hours of real time, with Jake and Sarah working together in perfect coordination. They developed an unspoken communication, with Sarah using her size to control the battlefield, while Jake used his agility and weapons to strike at the creature's weak points. When the last Shadow Bear finally fell, Jake was exhausted but exhilarated. He had just participated in the most epic boss battle of his gaming career, fighting alongside the game's supposed main antagonist to rescue the final missing child. But the most beautiful moment came when Jake emerged from Koala Kid's cave, carrying the little girl in his arms. Emma saw her transformed mother and let out a cry of pure joy, reaching out with both arms toward the massive creature. "Mama!" Emma screamed, and Sarah carefully took her youngest daughter into her clawed hands, holding the tiny girl against her chest while tears the size of raindrops fell from her enormous eyes. The family reunion was complete, but Jake realized that his role in their story wasn't finished yet. As they made their way back toward his campfire, he could see that Sarah was struggling with her transformed body. The battle with the Shadow Bears had wounded her, and the supernatural energies that maintained her current form were beginning to fluctuate. "What happens now?" Jake asked as they walked through the darkened forest. "How do we get you back to normal? How do we get all of you out of this forest?" Sarah's answer surprised him. "The game has rules, Jake. Invisible rules that govern everything that happens in this digital world. One of those rules is that the story must have an ending. And according to the game's programming, that ending comes on day 99. Jake checked his in-game calendar and saw that he was currently on day 67, so we have 32 more days. 32 more days to prepare, Sarah confirmed. On day 99, the forest's supernatural barriers will weaken enough for us to leave, but only if we can survive until then, and only if we can find a way to reverse my transformation. The next 30 days became a completely different experience for Jake. Instead of simply surviving and gathering resources, he was now part of a family unit working together toward a common goal. The 4 children helped with daily tasks, using their knowledge of the forest to guide Jake to the best resource locations. Sarah patrolled the area around their campfire every night, fighting off cultist raids and protecting the family from the various creatures that emerged after dark. During the day, Jake worked with Sarah to explore the deeper mysteries of the forest. They discovered the abandoned research facility where the cultists had conducted their experiments, finding journals and video logs that explained how Sarah's transformation had been accomplished. They learned that the forest itself was a kind of supernatural entity, feeding on human consciousness and using cultist rituals to transform people into guardian creatures. But they also found hope. Among the research notes was a detailed description of a reversal process, a way to undo the transformations and restore people to their original human forms. The process required rare ingredients that could only be gathered from specific locations in the forest, and it had to be performed during the supernatural convergence that occurred every 99 days. Jake and Sarah spent weeks gathering the necessary components. They traveled to the heart of the swamp to collect glowing mushrooms that only grew in areas touched by otherworldly energy. They climbed the highest mountain peak to find crystals that had been charged by years of lightning strikes. They dove into the deepest lake to retrieve pearls that had absorbed the moonlight of countless full moons. Each expedition was an adventure in itself, filled with dangerous creatures and environmental challenges. But working together, Jake and Sarah proved to be an unstoppable team. Her strength and intimate knowledge of the forest, combined with his human ingenuity and gaming skills, made them capable of overcoming any obstacle. The children, meanwhile, had taken on the role of camp guardians. They had learned to maintain the campfire, prepare food, and even craft basic weapons and tools. Their artwork had evolved as well, with their crayon drawings now showing scenes of hope and healing rather than trauma and separation. "Look, Mama," Kraken Kid said one evening, showing Sarah a new picture. "I drew our whole family back in our old house, having dinner together like we used to." Sarah looked at the drawing with her enormous eyes, and Jake could see the love and longing in her expression. "It's beautiful, sweetheart, and someday soon, we'll make that picture come true." As day 99 approached, Jake found himself becoming increasingly nervous. Everything they had worked for over the past month would come down to a single ritual that had to be performed at exactly the right time and in exactly the right way. If they failed, Sarah would remain trapped in her transformed state forever, and the family would never be able to leave the forest. The cultists, sensing that their power over the forest was about to be challenged, had increased their attacks. Every night brought waves of robed figures trying to breach their defenses and disrupt their preparations. But each time, Sarah fought them off with a ferocity that spoke to her determination to protect her family and reclaim her human form. On day 98, Jake made his final preparations. He had crafted the ritual components according to the exact specifications found in the research notes. He had memorized the incantations that would channel the forest's supernatural energy into the reversal process. And he had positioned everything in the perfect configuration around their campfire. The children seemed to sense that something important was about to happen. They stayed close to the campfire all day, helping Jake with last-minute preparations and creating new drawings that showed their family's anticipated return to normalcy. "Are you scared, Jake?" Dino Kid asked as the sun began to set on day 98. "A little," Jake admitted. "This is the most important thing I've ever tried to do in a game, but I believe it's going to work. Your mama is strong, and your family's love for each other is stronger than any magic the forest can create." That night, as day 99 finally arrived, Jake began the reversal ritual. He placed the gathered components in a circle around Sarah while the children held hands and chanted the words they had memorized from the research notes. The supernatural energies of the forest swirled around them, creating lights and sounds that seemed to come from another dimension entirely. Sarah's transformation began slowly, with her massive form shrinking and reshaping itself. Jake could see the pain she was experiencing as her body fought to return to its original human configuration, but he could also see her determination. This was her chance to be a normal mother again, to hold her children with human arms and speak to them with a human voice. The process took hours, with the supernatural energies growing stronger and more chaotic as the night progressed. At times, Jake worried that the ritual was going wrong, that Sarah might be destroyed rather than transformed. But the children never wavered in their chanting, their young voices providing an anchor of love and hope that guided their mother through the most difficult parts of the process. As dawn broke on day 100, the transformation was complete. Where the deer monster had stood, there was now a human woman. Tired, scarred, but unmistakably Sarah Mitchell. She knelt down and opened her arms, and all 4 children ran to her at once, creating a group embrace that brought tears to Jake's eyes. "Thank you," Sarah said to Jake, her voice now fully human but still carrying the depth of emotion that had characterized her transformed state. "Thank you for believing in us, for helping us stay together, for never giving up on our family." Jake looked around at the forest and noticed that it was changing. The oppressive atmosphere was lifting, the supernatural shadows were retreating, and normal sunlight was beginning to penetrate the canopy for the first time since he had started playing the game. "The forest is returning to normal," Jake observed. Sarah nodded, still holding her children close. When the supernatural entity that controlled this place lost its primary guardian, me, it lost most of its power. The forest will still be dangerous for a while, but it's no longer the twisted realm it was before. Together, the family began walking toward the edge of the forest. Jake followed, carrying the supplies they would need for their journey back to civilization. As they walked, the children chattered excitedly about their plans for the future, returning to school, seeing their friends again, living in a normal house with their mother. But Jake noticed that they hadn't forgotten their time in the forest. Each child carried some of their drawings, preserving the artwork they had created during their months of separation and reunion. And they frequently looked back at Sarah with expressions of pure adoration, as if they were still amazed to have their mother back in human form. At the forest's edge, they found a rescue team that had been searching for the Mitchell family since their plane crash months earlier. The reunion with the outside world was emotional and chaotic, with paramedics checking everyone for injuries while reporters asked countless questions about their survival. Jake watched from a distance as Sarah was reunited with other family members and friends who had never given up hope of finding her and the children alive. The official story would never include the supernatural elements of their experience, the transformation, the cultists, the sentient forest. Instead, it would be recorded as an incredible tale of survival against impossible odds. As the rescue helicopters prepared to take the Mitchell family back to civilization, Sarah approached Jake one final time. "I know this was just a game to you," she said quietly, "but what you did for us was real. You helped a mother find her children and a family stay together. That's something that matters, whether it happened in a digital world or the real one." Jake nodded, not trusting himself to speak. He had started playing 99 Nights in the Forest as a simple survival horror game, but it had become something much more meaningful. He had learned about love, sacrifice, family, and the power of never giving up hope. "Will I see you again?" Jake asked. Sarah smiled, and for just a moment, Jake could see a flicker of her transformed state in her eyes. Not the monstrous appearance, but the fierce protectiveness and unlimited love that had characterized the deer monster. "Every time you help someone who needs it," she said, "every time you refuse to give up on a person others have written off as lost, every time you look past someone's appearance to see the heart underneath. We'll always be connected, Jake, because you helped teach me that love can overcome any transformation." As the helicopters disappeared into the distance, Jake found himself standing alone in the normal, non-supernatural forest. His gaming session was over, and he had successfully completed 99 Nights in the Forest in a way that no other player ever had. Not just surviving until day 99, but actually solving the game's central mystery and reuniting a family that had been torn apart by circumstances beyond their control. When Jake finally logged out of the game and removed his headphones. He sat in silence for a long time, thinking about everything he had experienced. On his computer screen, the game showed a simple message. Congratulations, you have completed 99 nights in the forest. Your choices have created a unique ending that will be remembered forever. But Jake knew that the real reward wasn't a message on a screen or achievements in his gaming profile. It was the knowledge that he had participated in a story about the most powerful force in the universe, the love between a mother and her children. A love so strong that it could survive transformation, separation, and seemingly impossible odds. In the days that followed, Jake found himself thinking differently about the people around him. He wondered how many others were fighting invisible battles, dealing with transformations and challenges that no one else could see. He wondered how many families were separated by circumstances beyond their control, waiting for someone to care enough to help them find each other again. And sometimes, late at night, when he was walking alone, Jake could swear he heard a familiar voice carried on the wind, not the monstrous tones of the deer monster, but the warm, loving voice of Sarah Mitchell, thanking him once again for believing in the power of family. Jake never played 99 Nights in the Forest again. But he didn't need to. He had lived through the most important story the game had to tell, and he carried its lessons with him into every day of his real life. He had learned that monsters are often just people who have been hurt, that love can survive any transformation, and that sometimes the most heroic thing you can do is help a family stay together. The game had taught him that in a world full of darkness and supernatural threats, the brightest light comes from the bonds between people who refuse to give up on each other. And that was a lesson worth more than any achievement or high score could ever be. Years later, when Jake had become a successful game developer himself, he would create games that honored the memory of his experience in 99 Nights in the Forest. Games that showed players the power of love, sacrifice, and family. Games that demonstrated that the real monsters are often fear, hatred, and despair, and that these monsters can be defeated by ordinary people who choose to care about each other. But he never forgot Sarah Mitchell and her 4 children, or the lessons they had taught him about seeing past appearances to recognize the love underneath. And on quiet nights, when he was working late on a particularly challenging project, Jake could sometimes hear their voices encouraging him to keep trying, to never give up, and to remember that the best stories are always about people finding their way back to each other. Because in the end, that's what 99 Nights in the Forest had really been about. Not surviving a horror game, but discovering that love is the most powerful force in any world, whether digital or real. And Jake carried that truth with him for the rest of his life, sharing it with everyone he met and making sure that Sarah Mitchell's story of transformation and reunion would never be forgotten. The game had ended, but the love story it contained would continue forever in the hearts of everyone who learned that sometimes the most frightening creatures are just mothers trying to protect their children, and that the greatest adventures are about bringing families back together. Jake had played 99 Nights in the Forest, but more importantly, he had lived through 99 days of learning what it really means to be a hero. Not someone who slays monsters, but someone who sees the humanity in everyone and helps love triumph over fear. And in that lesson, Jake found something more valuable than any game could ever provide. An understanding of what it means to be truly alive in a world where connection, compassion, and family are the most important achievements of all. The forest had been survived, the family had been reunited, and Jake had discovered that the best horror stories are actually love stories in disguise, teaching us that no transformation is so complete that it can destroy the bonds between people who truly care about each other.